Good afternoon and welcome to this Rizzoli Education webinar. My name is Brian Ayres. I am an actor. I was trained as an actor, but I've worked a lot in education. I work for all ages, from very small children up to adults and students at university, exploring English and also literature. The title I've given for this afternoon is Robinson Crusoe, A Man for All Seasons. I first met Robinson Crusoe when I was a child, so in England it's a book which is essentially for children. But when I began to work on the video for Rizzoli and I began to prepare for this webinar, I realized more and more that Robinson Crusoe is still with us. Not only with us, but he has a great importance. The work, the character, is a man for all seasons. Today, I'm going to be reflecting on how to present the novel, how to involve the students in an exploration of the world of Robinson Crusoe. This is what I like doing, involving the students. I'm going to examine not only what I'm doing in relation to the program and the book I'm using, but also the process used to arrive at different ways of exploring literature. It is also a reflection on the questions: how do we personalize things? How do we remember? How do we recreate the past? It is divided into three parts. Part one, preparation, a clarification of the teacher's objectives, and a search for ideas. I hope to get more ideas that I can use. In this way, I can pick and choose at the end. Part two, working with some extracts in the textbook, its literature. Part three, an example of a lesson which uses some of the ideas I have already established as possible. This is the kind of lesson that I would do. Part one, seeking a point of view. In order to prepare, I will try and examine what I want. If I am clear about what I want to achieve and it's exciting for me, there is more chance of involving the students. So I'm looking for an objective which is mine and will help me be clear. My objective is to involve the students in order to encourage. Involve is the key word for me because I like to involve people. To encourage comprehension, associations, imagery, clarity, simplicity, and therefore memory. To encourage them to explore and discover a personal point of view, but it's also to find activities that I will enjoy. What do the students want? My answers would be to be involved, to understand, to enjoy, to learn. To learn includes the other things. What do the students need in relation to a novel? My answers would be to know the story, to relate it to their lives, to explore the language, to know something about the author. What means can I use? Well, any means that come to mind, any means that come to hand. Words, texts, images, drama, music, experience. My experience and the students. For this webinar, I'm going to focus on the students, myself, and the novel. Now I'm going to start looking for ideas I can use. What do I remember? What do I associate with Robinson Crusoe? Any key words, any key images? How much of the story do I remember? Do I have any personal memories or associations that might be useful? Have I ever been on a voyage or a survival course? Did I have problems leaving home like Crusoe? The students always appreciate personal contact. This is the difference between a webinar and a lesson. In terms of literature, they will enjoy the students, the teacher's involvement, what the teacher likes or dislikes, the teacher's voice, reading a text. This is something a lot of teachers have said to me. The teacher's interpretation and ideas, and the chance, of course, to participate. Let's refer now to the novel. Essentially, there are two ways of working, freely and systematically. I prefer starting freely and then putting what I have gathered into a structure which fits the timescale and the objectives dictated to by the students and the program. Working freely is more creative, personal, subjective, and very involving. Working systematically is more objective, can be just as involving, and is important for tests and exams. Here, I'm going to work freely, thinking of ideas that come to me, the approach that I use. But it's just as possible to start from a structure, maybe a lesson you already have, and then add some elements, some of which I will suggest, games, exercises, which create variety or reinforce what you want the students to understand or remember. Today, I'm presenting my approach, which will provide me with more material than I can fit into one lesson or even two, and give you as many suggestions as possible. Of course, you can always use these ideas in other contexts for other material. The novel. A useful question, even if I am only using the textbook as a point of reference, is what stands out for me after reading the novel? This is my favorite quote from the book. How strange a chequerwork of providence is the life of man. I would include it in the plot summary because I like it. These are just some of the images in the form of objects that we used in the film of the plot summary when we made the video which accompanies the book. For me, the key images are the island and a ship. You can find many images relating to Robinson Crusoe, fantastic images from all over the world if you like, but you can also create your own very simply with a few lines, with or without colour. Add sea, sand, a tree. The outline of a boat reminds us of the means of travel, both how he arrives, the wreck, and how he escapes. When the students know the story, they could do their own diagram. I've done this with poetry and other novels. It's interesting if they can create an image which in some way refers to the story. They could do it in groups or pairs. Actually, thinking about it, Crusoe's development of his life on the island is similar to the history of man's development, finding shelter, establishing a relationship with God, hunting, exploring the island by making a boat, taming animals, milking, making cheese, practicing agriculture, growing grapes, corn, etc., making bread, pottery, enlarging his home. It's not surprising that there is a Robinson Crusoe model in modern economics. I believe this image, as simple as it is, could be interesting and exciting for the students. But what will their reaction be? Maybe I can ask some questions. What would be the first thing the students would do if they found themselves on a desert island? Most of the answers will be mundane, but probably essential. Look for food, fresh water, shelter, but every now and again you might get something unusual, like, summon an army! This is what one girl responded to that question. Well, I thought about it, and one of the themes most referred to throughout the book is his fear of wild animals, cannibals, other peoples, and the need to defend himself. If you think about it, this theme is referred to every day in the news. The latest underground nuclear tests were held to improve our capacity to defend ourselves. Well, even in Italy now, there's a big debate about whether people should be allowed to defend themselves. The main themes I have summarized for myself, essentially, in the form of a mind map. So, essential images plus simple words. They stand out for me but they're themes which are returned to time and time again, in literature, but in other areas as well. Adventure, the search for new worlds, new knowledge, new experience. Profit, the search for El Dorado and the importance of money in terms of measuring success. It also deals with man alone and salvation, self-discovery. Modern man and 20th century art introduced the concept of alienation, so we could go back and look at the way Robinson Crusoe deals with his problem of being alone. Time is fundamental in the novel. He marks the passage of time on the cross he erects and keeps a diary. It gives a great sense of reality to the whole book. Crusoe's practical, methodological approach anticipates the rise of the industrious individual. Religion is very important. The cross, the Bible, the vision that he has, Friday's conversion. The confrontation with other cultures in our global world is simply but powerfully presented in the form of Friday and anticipates colonialism and our global culture. The emphasis on convincing us that it is a real account, full of concrete details, realistic. Well, art is continually renewing itself, and Robinson Crusoe is an example of a new form of art. The novel. As T.S. Eliot said, no generation is interested in art in quite the same way as any other. Each generation, like each individual, brings to the contemplation of art its own categories of appreciation. I would like the students to understand that this is a special book. It's noticeable that there are practically no women and there is no love, which is very unusual. Now I'm going to look for memorable passages from the novel. The novel begins with the title. Titles are always useful, particularly if you look at the title that is the original title. The Life and Strange Surprising Adventures of Robinson Crusoe of York, who lived 8 and 20 years all alone on an uninhabited island on the coast of America, near the mouth of the great river Orinoco, having been cast on shore by shipwreck, wherein all the men perished but himself, with an account of how he was at last as strangely delivered by pirates, written by himself. Well, that's a hell of a mouthful. Let's look at some key words. Adventures, plus the adjectives strange, surprising. What does adventure suggest to the students? What does strange suggest? Surprising. Open questions are like windows onto possibilities. Titles are good keys to memory. This title could make a good summary of the novel, but I think it's better cut. The Life and Strange Adventures should be in black, of Robinson Crusoe. The Life and Strange Surprising Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. Strange and surprising are not essential, but I like them. They're more poetic, so I would leave them in. Who lived 8 and 20 years alone on an uninhabited island, written by himself. I would leave written by himself if I want them to know that, 1. Defoe wanted people to believe that the book was a true account. 2. The novel is a new phenomena, and the difference between real events and the novel is not at this time clearly established. 3. Art always wants us to mediate between the artistic subject and our reality. I have an idea here. Tell the students they get 1 mark more at the next interrogation if they can remember the title correctly. Probably better the shorter one. I find these extracts from the text unforgettable. Extract 1. It happened one day, about noon, going towards my boat, I was exceedingly surprised with the print of a man's naked foot on the shore, which was very plain to be seen on the sand. I stood like one thunderstruck, or as if I had seen an apparition. I listened. I looked round me, but I could hear nothing, nor see anything. I went up to a rising ground to look farther. I went up the shore and down the shore, but it was all one. I could see no other impression but that one. I went to it again to see if there were any more, and to observe if it might not be my fancy, but there was no room for that, for there was exactly the print of a foot, toes, heel, and every part of a foot. Then the second extract. When I was come down the hill to the shore, as I said above, being to the southwest point of the island, I was perfectly confounded and amazed. Nor is it possible for me to express the horror of my mind at seeing the shore spread with skulls, hands, feet, and other bones of human bodies. And particularly I observed a place where there had been a fire made and a circle dug in the earth like a cockpit, where I supposed the savage wretches had sat down to their human feastings upon the bodies of their fellow creatures. Unforgettable. They are both strange, surprising, and with elements of the macabre worthy of any horror ghost story. They make me think of Frankenstein when he first sees the monster open his eyes, or Cathy at the window. Here is another powerful passage. It begins his journey towards being at peace with himself. In this second sleep, I had this terrible dream. I thought that I was sitting on the ground on the outside of my wall, where I sat when the storm blew after the earthquake, and that I saw a man descend from a great black cloud in a bright flame of fire and light upon the ground. He was all over as bright as a flame, so that I could but just bear to look towards him. His countenance was most inexpressibly dreadful, impossible for words to describe. When he stepped upon the ground with his feet, I thought the earth trembled, just as it had done before in the earthquake, and all the air looked, to my apprehension, as if it had been filled with flashes of fire. He was no sooner landed upon the earth, but he moved forward towards me with a long spear or weapon in his hand to kill me. And when he came to a rising ground at some distance, he spoke to me, or I heard a voice so terrible that it is impossible to express the terror of it. All that I can say I understood was this: seeing all these things have not brought thee to repentance, now shalt thou die. At which words I thought he lifted up the spear that was in his hand to kill me. This is visually incredibly powerful. Can the students imagine this passage as a film? How would they develop it as a series of film images? Fantastic. I would be tempted to ask the students to represent the following passage in small groups, either reading or reading and performing. They could work as a chorus or break the text up into sections, add sounds, search for rhythm, try and find a clear structure. They will find it easier if they follow, carefully, the punctuation. Below, I have added a slash to make it clearer. The wave that came upon me again buried me at once 20 or 30 feet deep in its own body, and I could feel myself carried with a mighty force and swiftness towards the shore. Both these phrases are very long. It's difficult to do on one breath. Since the students could find a difficulty here, I would suggest that, and I've added asterisks here to show where the phrasing should be, that we read it in phrases. The wave that came upon me again buried me at once 20 or 30 feet deep in its own body, and I could feel myself carried with a mighty force and swiftness towards the shore. A very great way, but I held my breath and assisted myself to swim still forward with all my might. I was ready to burst with holding my breath when, as I felt myself rising up, So, to my immediate relief, I found my head and hands shoot out above the surface of the water, and though it was not 2 seconds of time that I could keep myself so, yet it relieved me greatly, gave me breath and new courage. This gives the students a chance to actually breathe after each phrase. This is possible for them. The huge phrases before are very difficult. This could be a beautiful choral reading. Is it possible to capture the way the language reflects the sea? Even with the sounds of the sea, maybe the sounds of the birds. The text of the novel contains great detail, long sentences. Working on the structure and the sound of the language is helpful for all the literature that precedes and follows. Speaking it and hearing it spoken makes it more personal and alive. It is also more demanding. Ideally, it asks for interpretation as well as understanding. If I were marking the result of the reading, I would give marks for succeeding to go from beginning to end, maybe 2. Pronunciation, 2. Fluency, 2. Accuracy, marking the punctuation 3, because this is the main exercise. Creativity, any ideas which help the interpretation and make it more alive. I would be tempted to include the following in the plot summary, as it seems to me to introduce an element which is fundamental to all young people. Adult-child relationship. I put the main essence of it in blue. I would be satisfied with nothing but going to sea. And my inclination to this led me so strongly against the will, nay, the commands of my father, and against all the entreaties and persuasions of my mother and other friends, that there seemed to be something fatal in that propensity of nature, tending directly to the life of misery which was to befall me. The next extract, A, and the following, B, underlines the servant-master relationship, Crusoe and Friday, and the importance and difficulty of teaching a language. A. But to return to my new companion, I was greatly delighted with him and made it my business to teach him everything that was proper to make him useful, handy, and helpful. Better definition of a servant, difficult to find. B. Teaching a language, but especially to make him speak and understand me when I spoke, and he was the actest scholar that ever was, and particularly was so merry, so constantly diligent, and so pleased when he could but understand me or make me understand him, that it was very pleasant for me to talk to him. How could he teach Friday? What exactly would he have to do? Is there anyone in the class who speaks a language other than English or Italian? They could be asked to teach a little of their language to the others. Play the teacher. Later in the novel, when Crusoe has saved Friday's father and a Spaniard, he reflects on his situation. My island was now peopled, and I thought myself very rich in subjects, and it was a merry reflection, which I frequently made, how like a king I looked. First of all, the whole country was my own property, so that I had an undoubted right of dominion. He goes on. It has several words which refer to the power he now feels he has. Can the students find the words or phrases relating to power? My choice is in blue. There are also words which refer to economy, underlined in blue. If the choice is not clear, they could be asked to explain why they chose it. Just as Crusoe's relationship to money and his profit and loss assessment of his situation anticipates our commercial world, so his relationship to Friday and the others he has saved anticipates colonialism. Now I'm thinking about placing the novel in time. How would I do that? It's published in 1719. a little over 50 years after Oliver Cromwell died in 1658. Isaac Newton is still alive. John Locke, the great philosopher, is not long dead. One of the ways I remember these things is by what people wore. When I performed Daniel Defoe for the video, I wore this on the right. Perhaps a picture of the author will help. For me, a wig suggests a whole period of history. Isaac Newton, Christopher Wren, Samuel Pepys, Charles II, John Locke, the Great Fire of London. Do any of the students know the old song? London's burning, fetch the engines, fire, 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 pour on water, pour on water. This refers to the Great Fire of London. Oliver Cromwell, history. Isaac Newton, science. John Locke, philosophy. Other subjects that the students may study. There is also the biography in the form of a video with the questions for the students after watching. Page 239 in the book, It's Literature. Personally, I find it difficult to resist asking the students to create their own version of the story. It's always interesting. I've created 3 possibilities, maybe another planet, a plane crash, a time machine. I think it's better to let them do it in their own way and then assess what similarities and differences there are to the novel. Part 2. The book. Using some extracts from It's Literature, Volume 1, this will give me more ideas and suggest choices and a structure. Extract 1. This text clearly establishes a relationship with money, which remains a powerful magnet even if he can't use it. I find it very comic, actually. I'll just read the extract in blue. I discovered a locker with drawers in it, in one of which I found 2 or 3 razors and 1 pair of large scissors, with some 10 or a dozen of good knives and forks. In another, I found about £36 value in money. Some European coin, some Brazil, some pieces of 8, some gold, and some silver. I smiled to myself at the sight of this money. "Oh, drug," said I aloud, "what art thou good for? Thou art not worth to me, no, not the taking off the ground. One of those knives is worth all this heap." But he ends by saying, "However, upon second thought, I took it away." I could ask the students to give me a list of all the words they associate with money and write them on the board. Which words are positive and which negative? I could ask, why does he take the money? He says it's useless. I would like to introduce the idea that the development of a profit-orientated world will lead to problems which are very current today. Extract 2. This is the beginning of Crusoe's ability to come to terms with his situation and demonstrates how logical and practical he is. It also shows us how he uses the means natural to a man of commerce. I now began to consider seriously my condition and the circumstances I was reduced to, and I drew up the state of my affairs in writing, not so much to leave them to any that were to come after me, for I was likely to have but few heirs. He then makes a list of all the positives and negatives, which I would actually put in the form of a grid. Let this stand as a direction from the experience of the most miserable of all conditions in the world, that we may always find in it something to comfort ourselves from and to set in the description of good and evil on the credit side of the account. The class could read it in sequence, each person reading only up to the next punctuation mark. They could be asked to read it again and to stop at any word or passage they don't understand. Finally, they could be asked to read it once more, fluently. The balance sheet. Personally, I prefer in the form of a grid. Ask the students to work in pairs, translate the table into simple modern English, and present it as an argument, each person representing one side of the argument. This could be represented in front of the class or simply written. From Crusoe's point of view, it's a kind of soliloquy. He's debating with himself. But actually, it's also a little bit like Hamlet's soliloquy, to be or not to be, where you can look at it from two sides of the same person arguing. If it's represented, you can assess the correctness and quality of the language used and the clarity of speech. Perhaps 1 mark or 2 for how well they present it as an argument. The table of good and evil that Crusoe makes is a good technique for lots of problems. Maybe I could use it. What is the difference between Friday and Crusoe? Make a list of words that describe Friday and one that describes Crusoe. Later, Crusoe reflects on the fact that Friday has many good qualities, even though he's not Christian, and that many Christians could be seen as worse than Friday. We could make several lists if we wanted to. Friday's good and bad qualities, Crusoe's good and bad qualities, the good and bad sides of Crusoe's relationship with Friday. The idea of bookkeeping, profit and loss is alive and well in Robinson Crusoe. In modern economics, it is used as a simple framework to study. It imagines an economy with 1 consumer, Crusoe, 1 producer, Crusoe, and 2 goods. We could also add Friday, which complicates it. The next extract is a perfect short scene, which establishes the Crusoe-Friday relationship, plus it deals with essential communication. Can the students represent it in small groups? I would cut the last part in red to avoid the change of time, which creates 2 scenes. There's essentially action. They should give an idea of where they are. We could add language if we want, and even Crusoe's language, and even, Friday's language. But what about these antic gestures that Friday presents? What are they exactly? And how are they done? They're presumably a series of movements which communicate his gratitude and lead up to the placing of Crusoe's foot on his head. Clearly, this text has been selected because it suggests colonialism. But can the students excuse me, I'm getting a little bit dry. I'll just have another drink of water. It's very warm in here. Clearly, the text has been selected because it suggests colonialism. But can the students add other details which reinforce an understanding of Crusoe's world at this point? The cave, the goats, the bread, the milk, the clay pots, perhaps the sound of the sea, birds. Generally speaking, in any new rapport, you ask the person's name and then say yours. Here, Crusoe introduces himself as master and gives Friday his name. Marks, maybe up to 4 for creating a scene, which communicates the essential action, up to 3 for including details, 1 or 2 for characterization, and 1 for creative ideas which make it more entertaining and involving for us. Extract 4. Never man had a more faithful, loving, sincere servant than Friday was to me. I'm underlining the most important phrases for me. He has bestowed upon them, that is God. God has bestowed upon them the same powers, the same reason, the same affections, the same sentiments of kindness and obligation, the same passions and resentments of wrongs, the same sense of gratitude, sincerity, fidelity, and all the capacities of doing good and receiving good that he has given to us. And then he notes, this made me very melancholy sometimes, in reflecting, as the several occasions presented, how mean a use we make of all these. It's incredible how he manages to create this Friday-Crusoe relationship, which is master-servant, but at the same time reflects as we might do today. That text is divided into 3. 1, he reflects on the positive qualities of Friday. 2, he sees Friday in the context of all non-Christians. 3, he sees that in many ways they are better. Breaking texts down helps to focus on the essential. This passage is a good point of departure for a discussion about the meeting of different cultures and religions in our global world. Now I have lots of possibilities. What do I do with them? Part 3. Here is an outline of a 2-hour lesson, an outline of what I normally do when I'm dealing with Robinson Crusoe. I'm an actor, not a teacher. But 2 hours is enough to do the following with a good class. Before I begin, I will put an image on the board, or if you want to use the limb. If it's not too complicated, the sound of the sea. A cell phone is very easy to use. The title will be written too. I ask the students to make a précis of the title, an essential summary. Working in groups of 4 or 5 will give us several versions. I ask, what does the title suggest? What images come to mind when you think of an island? This would take about 20 minutes, I would assess. I tell them the story in the form of a plot summary. You could read the summary aloud, improvise, or use the film plot summary which accompanies the book. During the summary, I recite with actions some brief passages, some that I've already given you before, i.e. the beginning when he quarrels with his parents, the swimming to shore, the religious experience he has when he is ill, the footprint episode, and the discovery of the human remains on the beach. In this way, they hear Defoe's language. I would often abbreviate this and also do it in relation to the reaction of the students. At the end, I ask them, what do you remember? I write the most important things they remember on the board. The idea is to encourage them to try and remember one, and to understand that a series of words, characters, actions, very simple things, places, impressions, are the beginning of a more complete picture. I expect a series of very simple or brief responses, which could be just one word. Then I read, in a nutshell, page 238 in the book, a short plot summary. At the end, I ask them, do you remember any more? I ask them, what would you add to the drawing on the board now? And I write or draw what they suggest. So I'm adding to the original image, which remains on the board throughout the lesson. I ask the students now, working in groups of 4 or 5, to imagine and either describe or enact a situation analogous to Robinson Crusoe. Their equivalent of someone stranded. Where? How? What happens? And or what happens if the person stranded meets another culture? It could be on an island, another planet, in a forest, a desert. What means of transport are used? How does the story end? How do we know about the story? Then the contribution of each group will be either seen or read, and I will ask them to find parallels with what they have produced and comment myself on the similarities and differences. In order to explore the extracts of the novel in its literature, I would need at least another lesson. I could use some of the suggestions in part 2. Now, if you wish, you could also watch the Today video. The Today video gives suggestions for finding links, past and present. But can you find any others? Can the students find any others? Also links with other authors, subjects, films, songs, other subjects. Is there anything like this in Italian? Certainly, it has had philosophical ramifications. Rousseau liked it. How do we personalize? How do we remember? How do we recreate the past? We use an infinite variety of means. I would say this could be a lot of fun. And so I close this webinar and open to you for any questions. Okay, the first question is, how long does it take? Well, this is a very good question. In terms of my lesson, it takes a double lesson. If you're talking in terms of each activity, I can't really give you an immediate answer, but it's certainly something that you need to seriously consider. How long does it take? Obviously, you have your program and you have to complete the program. The way that I analyze how long it will take is I imagine doing it with the students. For example, the text, if I want to know how long it takes reading it, I read it and time it. Probably you have a good idea how long activities take. If you don't, then I would suggest that you do one at a time, not a whole series. And in this way, you begin to understand also the time elements, because it depends so much on the students you have in front of you. If I'm working with a group of students in Professionale, it's completely different than if I'm working with a group of students in Scuola Classico. So this is very relative. Good question, though. Do you always carry out skimming and scanning techniques, or the SQ3R in literature? No, I vary enormously with what I do. I try and do what I think is appropriate for the situation. Again, here, it depends also on the class. So, for example, some classes need to be involved, they need to be activated, and some classes actually need to be stopped, if you like, because they're doing too much. Can you please suggest other authors for this type of lesson? In my opinion, virtually any novel. Dickens is great, because Dickens has the same problem with, for example, linguistically. In fact, it's wonderful trying to read Dickens, because his love of language is so intense and so explosive that it's actually very difficult to read. But doing it in small blocks and exploring it in this way, I think is a good way of dealing with it. At the same time, Dickens creates these wonderful situations and incredible characters. So just asking a student, for example, to imagine what kind of characters they are, to describe them, because Dickens describes his characters very well, but the students need to have their image. As far as I'm concerned, obviously this approach works, I would say, fantastically for drama, for virtually any drama. Somebody like Oscar Wilde is more difficult to deal with, because the kind of subject, the kind of material he's offering us is much more intellectual, but certainly any drama, this will be perfect for this kind of approach. Is it a good idea to watch a movie from the novel? Well, yes. In my opinion, I think it's fantastic to watch movies. Also because, anyway, for the students, this is something which is really present. They're used to watching movies. They're used to getting information from movies. And I think that it's an excellent thing to do in school, although if you watch the whole novel without stopping, asking questions, without analyzing certain parts of it, it will just be another let's say, in front of the screen experience, rather than a reflection on, for example, how the hell is a movie made? I mean, a movie is incredibly complex, as complex, maybe even more so from a certain point of view, than a novel. But so in this case, we should be watching it from the point of view of trying to understand what happens in the film. But I think it's a good experience. You could also read passages from the book and ask them, make comparisons, and to think, do you think they get it? Because of course the movie is always different. But anyway, in my opinion, it's an excellent idea. I mean, if I watch, for example, Oliver Twist, the most recent one, it's fantastically well done by a great director. So if you find a good film, it's wonderful. Which grade would you propose it to? Well, generally speaking, I would do this for liceo classico or liceo scientifico, and generally speaking, they would do this in either the third or the fourth year. It depends a lot on the teacher. It depends on your program, obviously, but certainly I do it, generally speaking, for the third or fourth year. In the fifth year, you're moving on to a much more modern period, generally speaking, probably to the third year. Although very often I do for the third year, I tend to do a lot of Shakespeare. I would love to do something like that with other literature works, such as short stories, maybe, because it's short essays. I can only imagine stories. Short stories are fantastic because, of course, they're short. And I think it's an excellent discipline, if you like, because one of the problems we have is you're dealing with something which is relatively very long. And it's very difficult to present that in a short period. A short story is much simpler. So I think this is another good idea, because doing it with short stories is another option. Do my students need to possess any drama technique as a prerequisite? No, but if you're introducing something which they're not used to doing, I think, and which is not generally speaking done in Italian schools, certainly not in a literature lesson or a language lesson, I think you have to make them understand the point, and you have to be fairly disciplined about it. That is to say, you need to assess it. It needs to be assessed in one way or another. And they need to be very disciplined in terms of trying to make it as good as possible, because there are many things involved. I think one of the problems today is that actually students very often find it very difficult to do this. One of the problems they have is that it is almost impossible for them to actually present things to other people. Because one of the problems today is that they don't have a social life which is the same as the one that I had, or the one that many other people have had, very often teachers. So in this case, they have this fear, which is a natural thing, it's an absolutely normal thing, to have fear of the others, to be judged. So in my opinion, this is a very good technique, but it should be made serious, proposed seriously. It's a technique which actually is going to be assessed in one way or another. So but they don't have to have a prerequisite, because anyway, everybody does have a prerequisite. How many students have not ever watched a movie? Or how many students never watch something on YouTube? The presentation is very important. So in this case, we're actually assessing how you present things, not only in a novel, but also how you actually do it, how you present it by speaking, by acting, by whatever. Okay. How to involve weak or shy students? Ask them to do as little as possible. Always start with something very simple. One of the activities that I do is that I create scenes, stories, plays from nothing. And the first question will always be, could you give me one English word? Of course, the students don't believe this. They don't know what I want. They think that there must be some kind of good word as opposed to a bad word. So they take a little bit of time. But actually, it's dead simple. Once I've got one word, as Harold Pinter says, a blank page is an exciting but frightening thing. One word, apple, colour, shape, where? On a tree. Where? In a garden. Where is the garden? Next to a house. Anybody in the house? Yes, I've got a story here. So in this case, I would start very simply. This is why I would always start by asking them to read, for example, a phrase at a time. One student, one phrase. Another student, another phrase. They can do this. It's not difficult for them. And this will help the shy students to actually do something. And then, of course, you encourage them. You say, that was brilliant. Okay. In this case, once they've got the idea and begin to explore, then you can begin to be more critical. So I would be very careful about the way that I approach it, and I do. I'm very attentive. I watch very carefully, and the students that are shy or whatever, I encourage as much as possible. I come back to them. So I don't just go away and leave them. I come back to them to try and involve them again if they're not. Maybe it would be more interesting to study Defoe by Coetzee and then compare it to, oh wow, why not? Absolutely. This is perfect because it clearly, I'm assuming that in this case, you're actually thinking of doing something which you think is valuable. Certainly it's more modern. And actually it shows the whole story in a completely different light. So this I think is a good idea. You could do that. Of course, there's the element of time. But if you do something that's valuable for you and you think is valuable for the students, they will get a lot out of it. Wouldn't you consider the fact that Defoe describes Friday physically similar to, Friday physically similar to a white man, even if he is a native, as a sort of racism? In this case, the way that he describes him, for me, is definitely predominantly racist, yes. However, it's an interesting reflection because he is essentially, it seems to me, master-servant racist. At the same time, he is forced to reflect on the fact, which is more modern, that actually this man is a man with qualities. I'm teaching in a professionale. How would you use Robinson Crusoe to teach agriculture micro-language? Wow. Well, I remember working once for a person that worked with geometry, and I did a course for teachers, and she went away and she came back some days later and she said, well, you know, I had this idea that you focus on very simple things and you get the students to be active, which of course in geometry they like that. So I got them all to create a door. Now, if you think about it, it seems like a very banal thing, but of course, if you're creating doors, you realize how many there are. I mean, the door that I've got here in front of me is glass. There are revolving doors. There are automatic doors. She got them to describe the door that they'd created and then present it. Well, agriculture. I mean, from a certain point of view, Robinson Crusoe has long passages which actually, as I was saying earlier, almost give you the history of man's development, certainly in terms of agriculture. And you could ask them, for example, how they would go about surviving on a desert island, using their knowledge of agriculture. This is something that just occurs to me at the moment. So, but you're absolutely right. Put before you students in a professionale, and they're talking about agriculture. We're talking about micro-language, but actually, how would they use that micro-language in order to be able to explore living on a desert island, for example? What does this micro-language do? What does it offer? That would be my immediate response. For which class would you suggest this book and activities? Well, if it's in the program, that's a given. If you're talking about a class which doesn't have to do it, then I would look for signals. So a class which is maybe likes the idea of adventure, likes the idea of exploring. Look at the class. The activities can be used for any material, actually. But sometimes you do need to think about a way of modifying them or using them for specific material. Which class? If you're going to actually look at the book, then it has to be a fairly advanced class. If you're just talking about the story, well, I must have read this story when I was about 7. Which prerequisites should the students have to be able to work easily on it? It's quite difficult language, so in this case, they don't have to have prerequisites which are very advanced if you work on it in a simple, direct way, taking, for example, certain extracts, working on the language in the way that I've suggested. Basically, I think it's not so much their prerequisites that are important, rather it's the way you approach it. And if you approach it very, very simply, and you ease in on these activities, then you will quickly see whether they are applicable or not. But they should be done very clearly, because the problem is that some of these activities they're not used to doing, so they can find them strange. They can ask themselves, what the hell is going on? Suddenly our teacher who's supposed to be standing up front and lecturing us all day is doing these activities. What's it all about? So if you explain it carefully, in my experience, they will enjoy it and get something out of it. But you do need to be careful about how it's introduced. I think the prerequisites are rather the approach that you use is more important than what they have. For example, if I've got first year class and I'm interested in introducing language, I can introduce the word adventure. If they know, I mean, it's not so difficult. Adventure, surprise. I can introduce individual words in order to begin to play, island, possibilities. Would you introduce the author's biography and context in details before or after the novel analysis? I'd go for after. The important thing is not the author. It's the material he produced, he or she. So, in my opinion, I would definitely go for the book. What's interesting for me about the author is to communicate to the students that, generally speaking, these people have exceptional qualities. I mean, this is a genius here. He's lasted until this time, which is already a question. How the hell is Daniel Defoe still here? After 300 years, he's still around. What's going on? So, and if you look at him and look at the character, he is actually a fascinating character. I don't think the actual life of the author is fundamental, but it can be very interesting. For example, we know very little about Shakespeare, but we do know about his time. We do know about the dynamic of his time. And this obviously feeds into the works. So in these terms, I think I would do it afterwards, definitely afterwards. Now I can go back because I've got this thing where I can actually see the whole question. Because of the fact the language used by Defoe belongs to the 18th century, maybe it would be more interesting to study Defoe by Courtesy. Okay, fantastic. Okay, that definitely good question. Why not? Do you always carry out skimming and scanning techniques or the SQ3R in literature, poems, etc.? No, I choose what I do in relation to what I'm doing and the students. I think that's it. Okay, they're signaling me here. It's like an aeroplane coming in. They're giving me signals. I should stop. Okay, so let's stop. Can I do one more? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, they're allowing me. Okay, I would love to do something like that with other literature works such as short stories. Take, for example, Evelyn by Joyce. Would it be feasible? Well, Evelyn's a tough task. However, definitely feasible. Thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm going to have to close now. Goodbye from Rizzoli and our webinar. Thank you for the technicians. Thank you very much. We give you a round of applause. Thank you and goodbye.